Welcome to the History in 10 Minutes series. Today, we're leaving Europe behind and heading to the southern tip of Africa to explore the complex, vibrant, and often painful history of South Africa. From ancient kingdoms to colonial conquest, and from apartheid to democracy, this is the story of a nation's remarkable transformation. Long before Europeans arrived, southern Africa was home to diverse communities. The earliest inhabitants were the San and Khoikhoi peoples, hunter-gatherers and pastoralists who left behind rich rock art that still tells stories today. Around the 3rd century CE, Bantu-speaking peoples began migrating southward, bringing iron-working skills and new agricultural practices. Over centuries, they formed powerful kingdoms, including Mapungubwe and later Great Zimbabwe, which had trade links as far as China and Persia. By the 15th century, coastal communities were thriving through Indian Ocean trade, interacting with Arab merchants. These societies were complex and politically organized, with distinct languages, cultures, and economies. Far from a blank slate, the region was a patchwork of peoples and traditions long before colonial maps drew borders. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company set up a refreshment station at the Cape of Good Hope, which soon grew into the Cape Colony. Enslaved people from Indonesia, India, and Madagascar were brought in to work the land. Dutch settlers, later known as Boers, expanded inland, clashing violently with indigenous Khoikhoi and San communities who were displaced and dispossessed. In the early 1800s, Britain took control of the Cape and abolished slavery in 1834, fueling tensions with Boer settlers. In response, many Boers launched the Great Trek, moving inland and founding independent republics like the Orange Free State and Transvaal. Meanwhile, African societies were undergoing major changes. The Zulu Kingdom, led by Shaka Zulu, rose to power through military innovation and conquest, sparking a wave of disruption known as the Mafeking. The interior of southern Africa became a contested space where settlers and African kingdoms fought for dominance, foreshadowing the struggles to come. This era laid the groundwork for a deeply divided land, one shaped by competing colonial powers, expanding settler communities, and resilient African nations. While the Cape became more connected to global trade, tensions over land, labor, and identity continued to simmer just beneath the surface. The discovery of diamonds near Kimberley in 1867, followed by gold on the Witwatersrand in 1886, transformed South Africa's destiny. These precious resources attracted a wave of foreign fortune seekers and massive British interest. The sudden economic boom turned the region into a global hotspot, but one marked by growing tensions. The British Empire sought to tighten its grip on the mineral-rich interior, while the independent Boer republics, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State, resisted external control. Rivalries escalated into the Second Anglo-Boer War, one of the most brutal conflicts in British colonial history, which lasted from 1899 to 1902. British forces employed scorched earth tactics, destroying farms and infrastructure, and forced thousands of Boer civilians, mostly women and children, into concentration camps, where many died from disease and neglect. The Boers fought fiercely using guerrilla tactics, but ultimately the British prevailed, and the republics were annexed. In 1910, the British unified their colonies and the former Boer territories into the Union of South Africa, a self-governing dominion within the empire. Though former enemies now shared political power, this union was exclusively for the white minority. Black South Africans, who made up the majority of the population, were systematically excluded from political life. In 1948, the National Party rose to power and institutionalized apartheid, a rigid system of racial segregation that touched every aspect of life. Under apartheid, South Africans were classified by race: white, black, colored, or Indian. This classification determined where people could live, whom they could marry, what jobs they could hold, and even which schools or hospitals they could use. Although white South Africans made up only around 20% of the population, they held nearly all political and economic power. The government seized land, destroyed multiracial neighborhoods like Sophiatown, and relocated families to racially segregated townships, often far from city centers and jobs. Opposition to this injustice took many forms. The African National Congress, ANC, originally founded in 1912, became a central force in organizing resistance. Early efforts focused on peaceful protest and civil disobedience. But after the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, when police killed 69 people during a protest against past laws, the government banned the ANC and other anti-apartheid groups. This marked the start of a harsher crackdown. Thousands were detained without trial, tortured, or forced into exile. Key figures like Nelson Mandela were arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Mandela would spend 27 years behind bars, becoming a global symbol of resistance and hope. Despite harsh repression, opposition persisted. Underground networks kept the struggle alive, while international pressure intensified. Countries imposed sanctions, artists refused to perform in South Africa, and global movements pushed for isolation of the apartheid regime. Inside the country, youth uprisings, most notably the Soweto Revolt of 1976, sparked by students protesting the use of Afrikaans in schools, brought renewed urgency and global attention. Protesters were met with brutal force, but their courage helped inspire a new generation to continue the fight for freedom. By the late 1980s, the apartheid regime was crumbling from within. Decades of resistance had taken their toll, the economy was reeling under international sanctions, and South Africa had become a pariah on the world stage. Inside the country, protests, strikes, and civil disobedience intensified. The government, led by President Frederick Willem de Klerk, realized that reform was no longer optional. It was inevitable. In 1990, de Klerk made a historic announcement. Political parties like the ANC would be unbanned, and Nelson Mandela would be released after 27 years in prison. His release was met with joy and hope, but also fear of civil war. Mandela, however, urged calm and unity, famously stating that South Africa must build a society in which all South Africans, both black and white, can live in harmony and with equal opportunities. What followed were difficult years of negotiation. Violence between political factions surged, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and the townships around Johannesburg. But leaders from across the spectrum pushed forward, determined not to let decades of struggle end in chaos. A new constitution was drafted, and in April 1994, the country held its first free and fair elections. The sight was unforgettable, lines of voters stretching for miles, many casting a ballot for the first time in their lives. When the results came in, the ANC had won decisively, and Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president. The world celebrated not just the victory, but the peaceful transfer of power, a rare and powerful moment of transformation through dialogue and not bloodshed. Though apartheid officially ended, its legacy remains. South Africa has struggled with high unemployment, poverty, corruption, and unequal access to services. Land reform has been slow, and public frustration often erupts into protest. At the same time, the country remains a regional powerhouse with a dynamic economy, strong institutions, and vibrant civil society. Today, South Africa is a land of contrasts. Skyscrapers rise beside townships. A world-class constitution coexists with social inequality. Yet it's also a country of resilience, creativity, and global influence in music, sports, literature, and politics. From ancient kingdoms to apartheid and democracy, South Africa's story is still unfolding. It's a testament to struggle and survival, and to the hope that a better future is always worth fighting for.